Hello, so right now we're going to start building a SaaS with Django. Basically, this involves adding multi-tenancy to your project. So for the demonstration, we are going to be using the Django block application we built during the blog series, link in the description. Also, if you check the description, you're going to see the link to this final source code, which is the SaaS block, and in the readme, you're going to find steps which you are going to follow to implement this. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and grab the initial project file for the block application, but you can also go ahead and use your own Django block or Django project. So I'm just going to copy the command SSH. You can either use HTTPS or SSH, but since I'm using SSH, I'll just copy this command. So right now, I'll head over to my desktop. I'm presently on Linux, but if you're on Windows, just make sure you open a command prompt. Or you just go and search command prompt, I think you should know how to open like command prompt. So right now, I'm just going to open my terminal, and then once I have this, I'm just going to paste in that code, then press enter, and as you can see, it's cloning the project. Like I said, on Windows, you just go ahead, open command prompt, and then you write the same command. If you have an issue, just search for command prompt or leave a message leave a comment. I'm going to help you out. So once that has been done, I already have my Django blocks which have been cloned on my local machine. I'm going to close this, then head over to Visual Studio Code, which is my favorite code editor, and then I'm going to go to open folder. The folder is on my desktop, then I open it, Django block. Then now I'm going to click OK. Yes. So right now I'm set. So what we want to do is to make this Django project a SaaS, or to transform it to a SaaS. That is, we are going to add multi-tenancy to it. So if I go ahead on the readme, you're going to see that the next step actually involves creating a virtual environment. If you have never created your own virtual environment, go ahead and create it. So I'm just going to go ahead and create mine, or open a new terminal from above, and I'm going to enlarge that. All right, I think this should be okay. So right now, let's see. All right, right now I'm just going to paste that to create my own virtual environment. A virtual environment is where all the requirements or packages needed by your Django project are going to be saved. So as you can see, it has created the requirement, or like the environment folder. So after that, I'm supposed to activate the environment. So I'm going to use this command. If you're on Windows, you're actually going to use this command. Alright, once I press enter, you can see that my virtual environment has been activated, meaning that all the packages I'm using now are from this virtual environment as indicated by these brackets. So I'm sure I've activated my virtual environment. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and install all the requirements needed by the project. Come to requirements.txt, you can see all the requirements needed by Django project are presently here. So what I'm going to do now is to use the command I just copied to install all of them. Alright, so it's going to go ahead and install all the requirements, but mine is going to be a little bit faster because I've already installed the requirements. It's just using the catch requirements are like the previously downloaded. So alright, that has been installed. Now let's move forward to the next step. I'm supposed to make sure that my project is up and running. If you're using your own Django project, you actually have to make sure that your project is running before proceeding. So with this, my server is running, and let me take a look at localhost. Okay. Alright, perfect. My Django block application is running. So right now, if you are using your own project, you just have to make sure your project is up and running. So I'm just going to go ahead and close the server. Ctrl+C to close the server, and now we are good to go. So I'm going to go back to this, then continue following the steps. So what we are going to do now is we are going to install Django Tenant. Remember we mentioned Django Tenant in the previous video where I was explaining that it uses the semi-isolated approach to implement a SaaS or to add multi-tenancy. So I'm going to use pip install Django Tenant, which is supposed to install the Django Tenant. Alright, once that has been installed, I'm supposed to go ahead and install this other package, which is in fact the PS scope to something like that. And this package is what is going to be used to communicate with our Postgres database. Remember I mentioned that Django Tenant, like in the semi-isolated approach, you need to use a database that supports schema, and one of the databases that supports schema is a Postgres database, and this package is used to communicate with the Postgres database. Actually, on Windows you might face some errors maybe installing this, but if you face any error, just don't forget to leave a comment I'm going to get back to you and help you, link you to where you can easily solve your problem. So once I've installed that package, I think I'm good to go for now. So I'm just going to use this command to save those newly installed packages to my requirements.txt file. Alright, as you can see, it has added those packages to my requirements.txt file. So right now I'm good to go. So basically, as a prerequisite, you need to have Postgres already installed on your machine. As you can see, here is mine. I have Postgres already installed on my machine and it's PgAdmin. I'm going to leave a link for the Windows installer for PgAdmin, but if you're on Ubuntu, you have to install the PgAdmin or Postgres database plus PgAdmin yourself. So right now, let's take a look at where we are. So I'm done. So now we are supposed to set up the Django Tenant. First thing we have to do is to add the Django Tenant middleware. This is what checks to know on which database or on which schema it's supposed to check the data. Let me explain that. So if I come to core, I have my settings and then I have my middleware. Let's go to the middleware. So basically, when your Django server or Django application is receiving a request, what happens is the request move from the top middleware to down and right down. So what we are doing now is we are adding the Django Tenant middleware as the first middleware. Why? Because this middleware now is going to be used to determine which portion of the database is going to be searched. For example, remember in a semi-isolated approach, we have one database with several schemas, and in each schema, like we have schema A, schema B, and schema C, etc. So when you receive a request, when someone is requesting for something on your Django application, this middleware now is going to get that request and say that, okay, from which schema are you looking for data, and your request is having the schema, your request has the schema name, which is like, I'm looking for request A, I'm looking for data from schema A, So once the Django Tenant middleware knows that your request is going towards schema A, it's going to go ahead and look for schema A or direct all your requests to schema A. In that way, we have separated the data easily, and now we are going to update the database configuration with this new database configuration. So if you check here, we should be using the default Django database, but now we are going to override that. So I'm just going to paste that. Then number one, you have to add the tenant engine that is used to communicate with the Postgres backend. Then now the name of your database, mine is SaaS. Then now the user, my own user, it's Omen. Then now the password and localhost. So let's take a look at that. So if I come to PgAdmin, you're going to see that I have a database called SaaS, and that SaaS is owned by the user Omen, and the password is simply password. It's on localhost and port D. So that means I'm connecting now my Django project to a Postgres database. So once that is done, we have connected the middleware that actually look for which tenant or which schema we want data from. Then now we have the database, and we are going to now add the database router. Let's see just below it. Alright, I have the tenant database router added. Now you can check full setups for this, like full instruction how to set up Django Tenant using this link, but this basically already shows you how to do it. So now what we are going to do now is we are going to create a tenant app. This app is going to have all the details about each of our tenant. Like for example, we have customer A, we are going to save the data about customer A there. We have customer B, we are going to save the data about customer B there. So I'm going to use this command python manage.py start app tenant to create a new app. So let me pull that up. Alright, that should create a new app. Alright, I've gone ahead and created a new app called tenant, and now I'm going to create the models for it as shown here. So I'm going to go ahead and create the model. Alright, as you can see, the tenant app, I'm just going to go ahead and create the model. Now let me just copy that and paste. Okay, let's see what's going on here. So if you check the Django tenant documentation, you're going to see that by default we have to inherit from the tenant mixin and the domain mixin. So basically the tenant mixin contains fields that are going to be used to save data about a tenant, and then this domain, we are not actually supposed to add anything, but you're just going to have a link that is going to define which tenant we are requesting for data from, which you are going to see. So I have the user, the tenant has a user field. Remember in a block application we already had a user, so right now we have a user, a tenant is related to a user. We have the block name, the block image, then we have future updated at several fields about the tenant. Description of the tenant is active. We are going to use this to activate the SaaS or the tenant, or deactivate the tenant website. Then created on an auto create schema means, in fact I'm going to explain that when we arrive at the point, an auto drop schema. So right now let's go ahead. I've gone ahead and created the tenant models. Right now what you want to do is to configure the tenant model. So I'm going to copy this, then go now to my settings.py file. It's in core settings.py file. Then I'm going to add this. So these are links to my tenant. Here is a T. So the tenant model is a tenant.tenant. So in tenant I have the tenant model, which is this, and then I have the tenant domain name, tenant domain model, which is what is going to have the link that is specifying the tenant I want to access. So right now I'm ready to move. So now we are going to set up shared apps and tenant apps. So basically the shared apps are being stored on the, like in Postgres schemas, right? We have the main or the public schema, which has like overall information, and we have the tenant or the other schemas. So basically the shared apps are going to be saved on the public schema of the Postgres database. So all of these are going to be saved on the public schema, while these ones are going to be saved specifically just on the tenant schemas. So let me just copy all of this and explain again. Like I said, the shared schema, the shared apps are going to be saved on the public schema of the Postgres database, and the tenant apps are going to be saved only on the specific schemas of those tenants. Let's go ahead, and then I'm just going to paste that. So this is my new shared apps, so apps definition. So I'm just going to clean that. Yeah, so I have this Django tenant is supposed to be at the top, the app having my tenant models, and then basic stuff. Then now these are just stuffs from the Django block application series, like the Neat or the CK editor, then my blog app. And then what happens is I'm putting the blog app here and the blog app here. The problem now I'm trying to solve here is because if I don't put the blog app here on my public schema, like the schema that has general information, like the tenant details, the details about the user are being saved on my public schema, and also I have this block app. So I'm putting the block app on this public schema too, so that the structure of this of my public schema should be similar to that of the tenant schema. If not, you're going to have some programming error. So this is just to solve the issue, though it's not necessary. Normally what you want to do is to put all specific tenant apps here, but like I said, I'm putting the block app here to avoid some programming issues. So once that is done, I think my app has been configured, and right now I'll go ahead. Okay, let me just check. Okay, right now I'm just going to apply migrations. Make migrations. Let's see. This make migration is going to create the tenant model and the domain model. And then now this is just in case. So I'm just going to apply this to make the migrations too. Alright, this is just in case you do not have the migration files for the block. So right now I'm going to use now this modify migrate schema command, which is actually, remember in Django, the first thing you want to do is make migrations, which is going to convert your models into, like, prepare your models for, what Django does, it converts the file you've written. Like for example, I have my model I've written, so now it creates a migration file that has all the details about my models, and then now these files now are going to be used to convert it into SQL commands to actually create those tables on our database. So after I've applied migrations, it has created the migration folder with all the details about the fields I want to create. For example, big auto field, car, block name, and stuff like that. So now I'm supposed to apply the migrations, that is to actually create those fields on my database. So presently in Django Tenant we have a modified migrate command, which is migrate schema. And let's just take a look at my database right now. So if I come here, okay, let me just refresh. Oh no, okay. Okay, as you can see, if I come to my database SaaS, which I'm using for the project, then I go to schema, you're going to see that by default, as I mentioned, there is a public schema that we are going to be saving all the data about, maybe the client and some other specific general stuffs about a SaaS. Then now we are going to be having now other schemas which we are going to be saving the tenant specific data. So right now we have only one schema, which is a public schema. So I'm going to come here now here, then hit enter, and that should apply all the migrations. Alright, the migrations have been applied. That means my fields have been created in the database. Now if I come now here and click here, I should have tables. Okay, now I have my tenant domain and tenant field. Like, it means the migrations have been successfully applied to my database. So as you can see, those tables are found on my public schema. Now let's go ahead. Now I'm going to create a user, the first user. This is because the create tenant command needs a user. So I'm going to clear this up. Create a user, let's say admin. Let me just keep that password. Alright, I've created my first user. Remember, I'm creating this because we need an initial user when creating a tenant. So now what I'm doing is I want to create my initial tenant. In setting up Django Tenant, you have to create an initial tenant, which is the tenant that is responsible for the public database. That is, all the data about that tenant is going to be saved on the public database. It's just like the data about my software as a service are going to be saved there. So that is, the first tenant is supposed to be the public, the public schema. That is the data related to my SaaS, and that's where all the data is going to be save. So I'm going to call that, you have to call that public in fact. So you call that public. Then when I say user1 is referring to the user I just created. That's why I say that for me to create a schema, I need a user as defined here in my tenant domain, like in my tenant model. For me to create a tenant, I need a user. So I created an initial user, so I'm going to use to create my first, like the first schema or this, so I'll create my first public or my first schema or the public schema. So I press enter. I'll just say main block, then now no image, let's just leave it like that. Is active true. We are going to use this field to be disabling some how do they say, some tenant. When you create a tenant, you want to actually activate or deactivate the tenant at some point, like activate the subscription. Then now, as I mentioned, your first tenant is always the public, or your first schema is always the public schema, which all the data are going to be saved, which all the data about this schema or about this tenant are going to be saved on the public schema, as we saw here. So we have the public schema, all the data are going to be saved here, and those are data about your software as a service. So after setting the public schema, you also need the local host or the domain of your website, because what Django Tenant does, it uses the domain to identify which tenant you're requesting data from. And the main, by default, when you launch the Django server, the domain you have is the local host. So I'm just going to put local host here, and then we're going to create the other domains of the tenant, and then you're going to see how it works. So it's primary, I'm going to say true, and there I think I'm done. After that, I'm going to create a super user, and using this new Django Tenant command, which is different from the one Django uses, like manage.py create super user. This one is create tenant super user. So I'm going to use this to see, and then as you can see, I have only one schema, which is the public schema. So enter the tenant schema. I'm creating a super user for the public schema. So I'm going to type in public username admin 1, let me just say 1, email none, password. Alright, so now I've created a tenant super user. Then now I'm going to go ahead and run server, then check what is happening. Alright, my server is running. It means all the steps I've been doing are successful. So what I'm going to do now is go to this and refresh. Alright, remember as I was saying, all the data, if I come to my settings.py file right now, what is happening is, since I have the block application on my public database or on my public schema, when I run my application now, it gets the data for this, like for this, it just run my block application as it would normally. But now we have new features in our application, because now this application is able to support like other users using the same code base. So I'm just going to go to admin, then we're going to start seeing. Alright, I think the admin one, yeah. Okay. Alright. Okay, this is the, okay, I did not add the tenant. Okay, that was skipped. I've not added the tenant app to my admin interface. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it. So I'll just go ahead and copy that and paste. So I'm just going to copy it and paste. These are basic Django. Alright, I've added the tenant now to my admin interface. For example, if you want the code for that, as I mentioned, this is a source code here. You can go to the SaaS block, go to the tenant app, then you're going to have the tenant app, then admin. You're going to have the configuration which I used to add to my admin interface. That's to make the tenant app present on it. So now if I refresh, alright, I have now my tenant app, and when I come here, I have one which is the public schema. The owner of the public schema is the admin, that is the main person having the software as a service. Then here, like I mentioned, we created a block on the public schema so that the public schema should have the same structure as those of our tenants. That is to avoid some programming issues. So right now, as you can see, this is the main domain, or my main domain for my software as a service. So what we're going to do now is we're going to proceed. We're going to proceed now and add a custom middleware. Like I mentioned, the middleware is what is being executed once a request, when a request is entering your Django app or something like that. Like when your Django application is receiving a request, sorry. So right now I'm just going to copy this, then head over to my core folder, and we are creating a middleware so that in case a tenant or a customer has not been activated. For example, what happens is you create your software as a service, someone comes in and sign up. Once the person signs up, you don't just want the person maybe to start using your software. So we want to create a middleware that is going to actually activate or deactivate the user in case the documents the user submitted were not okay, or you want to verify the user, or the user gets banned from the system. So that's why we are creating this custom middleware. Middleware.py. Oops. Alright, my custom middleware. Then I'm going to paste that. As you can see, I'm importing the Django Tenant middleware. For example, if I come to my settings.py middleware, I have the main tenant middleware. So I'm coming now and I'm importing it. Then now I'm trying to customize that main middleware into my own custom middleware. Then I get now the middleware and I say if the tenant is active, then like I'm testing, since I have the field in my tenant I have is active. So if active is false, that means I'm going to raise the exception tenant is inactive, else I return the tenant. So that's going to be used to deactivate or activate a user. So after applying my middleware, right now what I want to do is to add the custom middleware to my middleware folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. Alright, so I'm on my middleware. I'm just going to add that below it, then comment this out. Okay, so my Django tenant is receiving a request. Then as I mentioned earlier, the request now, this first middleware is going to check to know which schema I'm looking for data from, or which schema I'm looking for. Then now this call middleware now is just a middleware that is going to be used now to activate or deactivate a tenant. So once that is done, that should be it. So now let's go to our interface. Oh, the server is not running. The server stopped. Let's rerun the server. Alright, my server is running. I refresh the admin interface, and like I said, we have a main or a public schema. This is the main schema, or the main. This is just to make your application work. These are the steps used to like set up your Django tenant. So you just need this public schema as the first user of your database. So everything, it defines the core domain of your admin or your software, and some few details like the main user, the owner of the user, and then the details about your application. So what we are going to do now is to add actually a new tenant or a new customer. But what you want to do in practice is to create a form or a landing page for your application. For example, if I come to localhost, what you want to do is someone comes to localhost, now you like display welcome to Bloggies. Create your own blog right away. Then now once the person click on that button, now the person has a form where you can fill in the details. And for example, the form could be something like this, but I actually excluding the schema name. So as I mentioned, the user needs to be assigned, then the blog needs a name, then let's say the image of the blog. So I'm just going to choose any image. Let's go. Alright, the blog image, let me just click that. Description of the blog, FFF. Then now it's active. I'm actually going to toggle this, or let's say on signing up now, the person fills in the form, then you want the person to be not activated as soon, like you want to verify the person before activating the account. Then now this is where the magic start coming, like these are domain now. So what happens is this domain now is going to be used to find this specific schema. Like for example, this is the schema. Let me just give now the name for the schema. Like this is what Django, or this is the schema name for this specific user or for this specific block. So the schema name is block 1. So once we are going to apply this, you are going to see this being created here on a schema. We're not just going to have only public, but we're going to also have that schema which has the data about this specific block, and the data is going to be completely isolated from all the others. So I have my schema name, the user, the block name, I have an image. Then I'm just going to go ahead and create this. And let me explain what is happening now. If you come to your Django logs, you are going to see that migrations have been applied. That is, it's creating the section of your database as you're seeing. It's creating the section, applying all of this stuff. So it's actually applying the migrations and creating it to that tenant. So it does this automatically because in our models.py file we said auto create schema. That is, when I create a tenant, it automatically creates the schema on a database. And once I delete this auto drop schema, means once I delete a schema, it's going, like once I delete a tenant, it's going to now delete that schema. So let's go ahead and check that. Number one, if I come now maybe to my local host and say blog, okay, blog 1.localhost. Alright, as you can see, I received the information saying that tenant is inactive, which is done by this custom middleware. So tenant is inactive, it returns it that the tenant is inactive. So your tenant has signed up and has created his own block. Then now you are supposed to verify his account before now activating it. So this shows that this is what happens. Your Django tenant middleware, that is the first middleware, this first middleware receive this URL, and then what it's going to do now is it's going to use this first word or the first the subdomain. Since Django tenant is going to identify the schema which you're referring to, or the schema which you want data from, using this first word. So block 1.localhost, what it's going to do is going to take this and then know that what you want from the schema from which you want data is a block 1 schema. And if I have just the local host, it knows I'm getting data from my public schema. If I have the block 1, it knows I'm looking for data from my block 1 schema. So let's come to a database like PgAdmin and reload. Alright, after reloading, as you can see now, I have a public schema and a block 1 schema. This is where all the data about that specific tenant are going to be saved, or about that specific block. So right now I'm going to go ahead and activate that block. So I'm going to activate it, then save it. So I've validated my user, and my user now can actually use this block application. So if I come now here and refresh, that's it. I have a block application for this specific user, and I also have a block application for myself, or just to use in case. So this is the block application for a specific user, this is the other block application. To show that this is completely unrelated, let's go ahead and create an article on my main blog. So on the block in the scheme, and let's say if I go ahead, let's say user first name blah blah blah. Alright, I save that. I've created an author, headline. Alright, this is an article featured. and there you go. Let me just publish. Alright, I've saved it. So I have now an article on my localhost or the main or the public blog application. So if I refresh now, I should have now the data loaded here, or the blog article. As you can see now, I have a blog article on my main domain, and if I go now to my subdomain, which refers to that of the client or the customer, that is block 1, and refresh, I should have no article because the client has not yet created any article. So now with this, you have several instances of, like, you can have several instances of your blog or your Django project running using different schemas or for different users. So that's basically a SaaS. So what you want to do now is you have your main page that is having all the data about your or information about your SaaS. Someone comes in, then create the blog or something, like create the like its own usage for the software. Once he has created his own blog, he can now access it on the subdomain of your website. That is the basic way of creating like a SaaS, in such a way that now each data from this and the other user is different. So basically you have a SaaS now which you can manage from your admin interface and stuff like that. So if you even check here, you're going to see that this So as you can see, the user for block1.localhost also has its own admin interface, and what you want to do now is to create a super user for it. So you still go to your command, you stop, let's say for example you stop your server. So once the user has created an account, now you have to create now a super user for that account. So now I'm going to create it. Then if I list the different schemas available, I now have two schemas, that is the block 1 and then the localhost. So I'm going to use block 1. Then let's say block 1 admin, and there you go. I have created a super user for the block 1 admin interface. Now if I come here and alright, as you can see now, I've successfully logged in to the admin interface for that block 1, and now let's go ahead and just create an article, same thing, and make sure they are different. So I have the author. As you can see, for example, if I come to this admin interface, you're going to see that on creating a blog, I already created an author, which the author does not exist on that other admin interface. So when I come here, so the user now can be managing his own stuff about the blog, while you manage your own stuff about your blog. And with that said, you have your SaaS, or you can also create like a React front end that is going to be using this just to get the data, and then you create a customized user experience or a customized interface for specific users. So I'm just going to go ahead, create a new author, and that's it. Headline, let me use this. Let's just say cure. And with that, I think I have a new article, future, publish. Then I have a new article now on my block 1 localhost, and if I come now, I should see it there. Alright, block1.localhost now has its own has its own blog, and same thing here. We have 2 instances running, and you can go ahead and create as many instances as you want. So with this said, you have your own SaaS, or you know how to create a SaaS basically, and Nice having you here. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more.